Yeah, I did not want this for Sarah, unfortunately.
No.
I did not
No,
want
you
this to
don't.
happen to her. You're just like, oh, but she's gonna figure it out, or she's the smartest one right now, and then all of a sudden you're like, nope, it's not happening. She's her bones are gonna break in front of a bunch of people.
Just as a warning, spoilers ahead. Hi, I'm Amanda the Jedi, and this is Offset, the series where we deep dive some Prime Video classics, and today we are talking about the 2018 reimagining of Suspiria. Today I'm joined by Cecil Trachenberg and Millie De Chirico. Cecil, why don't you tell the people more about yourself and your channel, Good Bad Flicks?
Thank you. Primarily I'm talking about a lot of cult films, but also a lot of films that have bad reputations, they're misinterpreted, or they were ruined by a lot of studio involvement. And I like to get to the root of how the movie was made. A lot of times I'll talk to the creators, the people who worked on them, and get the full story of how the movie came out and why it ended up good or why it ended up bad.
That's awesome. Millie, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, I was a programmer over at Turner Classic Movies for about 19 years, and I programmed and curated a series called TCM Underground, and then wrote a book called TCM Underground, 50 Must-See Films from the World of Classic Cult and Late Night Cinema. I'm also the co-host of a film podcast called I Saw What You Did, which is on the Exactly Right Network.
Okay, so you're both a lot cooler than me, but that's fine, because today we're coming together to talk about Suspiria, specifically the 2018 reimagining by Luca Guadagnino of the 1977 classic by Dario Argento. It follows a young dancer from America pursuing a career in Berlin as political tensions rise throughout the country, but this world-renowned dance company may be hiding something more sinister within its walls, and this movie is just stacked with talent.
Right out of the gate, you've got Dakota Johnson, who I think is more than proving how she's only doing films that she really believes in. I think that this was one where she saw the artistic value of it, and she did it because it wasn't just a straight up remake of the original. It was a complete reimagining, which I give them a lot of credit for, because so many remakes are just the exact same film. Either they take a foreign film and they do it in English, and or they'll take something and just do the exact same film, only do it bad with new actors. This was a complete reimagining, so you can watch the original and the reimagining back to back and have two separate experiences. As far as talent-wise, with Tilda Swinton playing 3 roles in it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that she's got that third role in there as Dr. Klemperer, because I think in the movie it's credited different. It's credited as like a pseudonym.
Yeah, it's actually a very clever pseudonym. It was Dr. Lutz Ebersdorf. And the thing is, if you do a little bit of digging, Eber means swine and Dorf means town. So that's Swinton.
Swinton.
So that was clever. She the whole time when they were doing the press tour for the film, she was swearing up and down that this was a real person, and that was why they even had him credited on that. And then it wasn't until much later that it was discovered that it was her as a wearing the clumps
Prosthetics, yeah.
Prosthetics. Also, I think having Mia Goth in there was really big, because she's blown up in recent years because of the X trilogy. And I had actually started watching them before I had seen this. So it was neat being like, oh, there's her, like, as she was just about to break into not the mainstream, but the more public consciousness of the horror fandom.
Yeah, for sure. I know, I don't know if Millie has anybody specific. I just know that when I didn't realize that Chloe Grace Moretz was going to be in it. And then it starts on her, and she's just making such an impact right out the gate for a character that is traditionally not a throwaway, but just more like symbolically really important to what happens in the original Suspiria. It takes this whole other bigger leap of her doing something I never would have expected. Millie, I don't know if anybody really stood out to you in this otherwise, or of those two.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would be remiss if we didn't discuss just the deep bench of these legendary European actresses that are in this movie. I mean, you have people like Angela Winkler and Ingrid Cavan, who appeared in a lot of new German cinema in the 70s. And I know that Luca Guadagnino was a huge fan of Fassbinder, the director. And, with Ingrid Cavan, she appeared in Fassbinder movies. I mean, you've got Jessica Harper, who was in the original Suspiria, who makes a cameo at one point. So that's kind of secretly my favorite part of this film, is just seeing all of the the great European actresses that were in French films and Verhoeven films, and it's just so neat to see them back on screen. So
yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about Luca as a director in general. He just has such a passion for everything he does. So every movie, just you can tell that every decision he's making, it's very specific. It's very everything's just kind of built into these passion projects that he chooses. And with this movie specifically, it's kind of interesting because obviously the original is such a cult classic, and it kind of feels like this one is in its own. I know there's a lot of debate over the modern cult classic and what it actually takes to make something a cult classic, but this kind of feels like it's entering that area. What do you guys think of that original Suspiria and why it has such a lasting legacy that built into what Guadagnino was able to make here?
For me, the original I saw when I was way too young to watch it, and it terrified me, especially the big, not opening sequence, but the first really big set piece where the character Pat, who in the reimagining was Chloe Grace Moretz's character, but gets impaled on the with the stained glass, terrified me. Even watching it again recently, because I showed my wife, who she had never seen it before, and even she was like, "Oh my God, I was not expecting that." So the original to me is just terrifying, and it is great in all the best possible ways. It is a beautiful looking film. It is also my first giallo film, which sent me down an avenue where after I watched it, even though I was terrified, I was bribing my older sister to go to the video store and rent all the movies that I couldn't see. It's like, here, go rent me this one. I hear it's really good. And so that was how I ended up watching a lot of these kinds of films. And I think that it's a classic for a reason. I think it's kind of one of those films that for years it may have been a cult classic, but I think now it's breached that, and now it is just a classic. Like whenever you look at the top 100 best horror films of all time, it's almost always in there, and it deserves to be in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, I saw it because it got mentioned in Juno, of all places. They like the movie Juno. It gets mentioned between two characters, and I was like, I should check that out. And I'm glad I did. But yeah, Millie, how about you? Do you have any, with the TCM work, I'm sure you have lots of thoughts about Suspiria?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I am a huge fan of Italian horror films, especially from like the 70s and 80s. And I kind of got into it via the cannibal route, which is kind of disturbing. With like the, cannibal, God, I don't even want to go down this road. Yeah, I'm like, should I even go down this road? This is so weird. Anyway, but yeah, I'm a big fan of Italian horror films, and I kind of got into them via people like Lucio Fulci. And obviously Dario Argento is probably, at this point, he's probably the most famous Italian director of horror and thriller. And with giallo films, I think generally, I think the reason why his movies in particular are so beloved, I'd say, is because he just has a very distinct style to his films, and there's just bright colors. They're very evocative. And he also uses a lot of great music in his films. He usually works with the band Goblin, which I know people are big fans of. But when I first saw Suspiria, I honestly thought it was probably one of the most beautiful movies I'd ever seen. And, just the idea that it's, again, just so bright and so impactful, and, has like these very big, sort of death sequences that are kind of beautiful. And they're staged really, particularly, and they have like, again, this kind of signature, now we know as the signature Dario Argento style. I think that's kind of why people, are still watching it and still appreciate it. And I agree with you, Cecil. I think it's kind of moved beyond the sort of like exploitation realm, and now it's just sort of a bona fide classic.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, just speaking to the colors, I always think about like just like the reds, but just like the RGB lighting in general that you kind of get very vibrantly through the movie. But every time I rewatch it, I'm just kind of really moved by just how beautiful all of it looks. Like even just like the hallways, the set design, just everything looks so good in this movie. So it's not even like the colors being used to make up for a lack of something somewhere else. It's all very specific stylistic choices. And Cecil, just your claim to watch it too early, that kind of goes back to Guadagnino's experience as well, watching it when he was almost 14 and how it stuck with him. And that's kind of why this movie came to be, which I think a lot of people, when they first found out there was a Suspiria remake happening, probably were questioning if it should even be allowed to happen. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts in that kind of realm of like what went into making this and just the length of time it kind of took for it to happen.
It was announced, I believe in 2005, that it was going to be remade, and David Gordon Green was chosen to direct. And at that point, I believe his biggest film was Pineapple Express. And myself and a lot of other people were saying, this guy? Okay. And it went through a lot of issues, and eventually he left and went on and started doing other things, and eventually many years later ended up doing the new Halloween trilogy. But then the director Luca Guadagnino, when he decided that he was going to direct, I liked the fact that he threw out the script that he originally had and was like, if we're going to do this a complete overhaul, and went in and did an homage / complete reimagining of it, making it take place in 1977, which was the year when the original was released, and having a backdrop. Like originally, it focused largely on what was going on at the dance school, and really not a lot of what was going on in the outside world. It really focused on everything within there. Whereas the reimagining, it was the coven of witches at the dance school, but also the backdrop of what was going on with the Cold War, with a lot of terrorism, and it made it a much larger film that way.
Yeah, I really like that they decided to kind of like reframe it around the time that it was made and then building out from the world around it. And I know a lot of that, this is where I'm going to butcher a name, the writer David Kajganich or something along those lines. I'm sure we can get that on the screen to give him the proper credit. But I know that when Luca had asked him to work on the script, he had a lot of very specific things that he wanted so that it wouldn't fall into an area of horror that he's not personally a fan of. So I think it's kind of the collaboration between the two of them that we get this very unique and special piece of media in its own right.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most interesting things about this remake, to be honest, because just to go back, I mean, I'm a big fan of David Gordon Green and would have loved to have seen like maybe what he would have done with this remake. But I actually kind of love that, an Italian has remade an Italian classic in that way. But at the same time, centering it really within like the construct of sort of German history. And I just think it's interesting, just hearing interviews with Luca Guadagnino about, sort of being into new German cinema, like I said, and being a fan of Rainer Werner Fassbinder films. And the idea that he's taking this very specific time in sort of German history with, the Baader Meinhof, the Red Army faction, sort of being active. And I guess it's called the German Autumn, centering a story within this kind of very tumultuous, violent time, sort of outside of the dance academy, and then sort of having, the people within the walls sort of experiencing their own forms of violence. I just think that's really interesting. And I mean, honestly, didn't come through at all in the first film. I mean, I'd say the first film wasn't very political at all. And actually, I think they mentioned that it's in Berlin, but then really there's no kind of reference to it for the rest of the film, where, I think it's kind of incidentally in Berlin versus, obviously the remake, which is very much centered in kind of a German history.
Yeah, it's very intentional, and I like how they were able to use it to kind of reframe certain characters, like Patricia or Pat in the original. She's not just someone who gets expelled from the academy and runs away. It very much becomes a, oh no, she ran off to join the terrorists, to kind of shade away from what actually happened to her, because she was starting to have what Dr. Klemperer perceived as, psychotic delusions. So I do think that it gives them so much fun room to play with, and lets those like political tensions rising really, and like the abuse of powers going on in the outside world, reflect within what's going on in this coven in a really, really cool way. But so it's not even just like the story stuff that's different, though. I know a lot of people kind of had issues with some of the visuals. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I like the Guadagnino, when he approached it, he said, I feel like everything's been done the way that Argento can do, to the maximum it can do. So I'd like to be able to do something different, or I just feel like it has more value to approach it in a slightly different way. And I don't know if you guys feel similar, or if you were kind of expecting the more dramatic colors throughout the entire movie, but love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that by him going with the more muted color palette, it set it apart, because if he decided to go full on giallo with it, instantly would be the thing that everybody compares it to. So I think that it was definitely the smart maneuver to say, okay, I'm going to go with more of something like, because the whole thing's taking place during the Cold War and in West Berlin, make it very ugly, make it very oppressive, make it very muted,
very beige.
Lots of browns and beige. And so I think that it was definitely the smarter decision to go with. It was something that you noticed immediately, because in the original, almost instantly, once she arrives into the studio, it's just, beautiful. It's colors, it's reds, it's blues. And this, it's just gray and gray and gray and brown. And so you see right out of the gate, okay, this is what this is going to be. And definitely the smart decision.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I love a moody 70s movie color palette. I love taupes and mauves and browns and beiges. So, I feel like that was kind of a style of the 70s sort of generally in a lot of 70s movies, because I think in the 70s movies just were grittier and more, urban. And but yeah, I like that it's muted. And then it also, I think, is nice when you do, we get to that sort of dance sequence, with the sort of red, costuming, with like the sort of, I don't know, the little outfits,
like the rope outfits.
The rope, yeah. It really, in that moment, kind of, it just kind of really pops a lot more, knowing that, like, stylistically, or at least in the color palette, had been very not that for the majority of the film. So.
Absolutely. I do feel like it's used in a really expert way, so that when the colors do become more prominent and the red becomes a lot more prominent in later scenes, it does have so much more of an impact than if it was around the entire time. And that's not to say that the original didn't have impact. Obviously, it's extremely striking. We all know that, but just the different approach really made it like, oh, okay, so now we're going all in, and you get those really striking scenes. And I think that's probably a good time to transition into our scene reactions, and we can watch them together and just kind of give some thoughts on what's going on after, starting with clip number 1. Okay, so instantly, I love that. I feel like sometimes when there's dance routines in movies, especially with traditional actors, you're like, I don't know how this is going to go. But they clearly put the work into getting the actors there. And just that's kind of like the first pop of color we've really seen from her shirt. And I don't know, do you guys want the look when Tilda Swinton walks in, Madame Blanc? I don't know if you guys want to talk a little about that. To me, that's the moment that stands out in that scene.
For me, just the dedication to the dance, yes, I think is really huge, because my wife is an ex-jazz dancer, and so I know a lot about dance just simply by going to her recitals and whatnot. So I'm watching this movie and I'm like, oh, that's really, we used to watch So You Think You Can Dance. So I've got all these little, here, horror aficionado, and I know about dance. But so I'm watching this, and there are times where you can really see that it is the actress. It's really Dakota going for it. And I appreciated that because I looked into it, and evidently she took 2 years of ballet to prepare for this.
Oh, wow.
And that's pretty fantastic. Now, there are times where it is evident that is a stunt double, a dance double. But for the most part, it really looks like it's her doing it. And I think that added a lot more authenticity to it than having it cut away to somebody when it's like obviously not her. But I'd say for the most part, it's usually her. And I think that really is what stuck out to me, that it made it feel more authentic. And that scene just of her doing that, I was just exhausting watching. And
did you get the deep breaths? So like you really feel it as you're watching?
Yeah, it's just like, oh, she's gonna break down like any second here. And it stopped, and it's like, okay, that was really well choreographed.
Yeah, it's a really powerful scene because it's kind of the first time you really see her dancing and being physical, and just the vibe of people like watching her, and she's got something to prove because she's a new student. And the idea that maybe there's something else that's maybe possessing her in that moment. I mean, dance, I think generally is sort of a possession if you think about it, right? Like when people get the courage to dance, a lot of times they become sort of possessed with the moment in a weird way. But like watching her sort of, being very physical and doing these very like, interesting movements where it's like back bends and, arms and everything, and just having the scene of people watching her. And then there's that very quick zoom into Tilda's character. You start to wonder, like, what's actually happening here? Is this her? Is this her idea as she's performing in front of these people? Or maybe she's being taken over because she's in the dance studio in this sacred space. So I don't know. Every time I watch it, I get a little nervous, actually, because I'm like, what's going to happen? It feels a little dangerous,
Yeah, it's so interesting that it doesn't even immediately, it just, something's happening, but you don't know if it's sinister immediately because the music's not indicating one way or another what it might be. It's just like a tingling type music that something's happening. And I just love, Tilda's in a completely different room, and it's like she just senses something and it draws her there. And then in the dance, it's like a compass just locking on north the second it lands on her. So it just such a good setup for what's going to come for the movie, especially when we're told that she shouldn't even be auditioning. Tilda's character just was struck by something and invited this person out to audition, and everybody else in the dance academy is like, I'm sorry she brought you out here, but I don't think it's going to amount to anything. And then you get this amazing dance scene and what follows.
Yeah, I mean, that is like the one thing about this movie that I think really, to me at least, kind of amps up the terror in a weird way, is that there really isn't music playing to most of these dance sequences. Like the sound design of it is really just breaths and then the sounds of like bare feet on a wooden floor.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that, like, to me, I don't know. It just puts me in a mode where
it's primal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you're really focused more on the performer being the actual performer versus just performing a number. And I don't know, like I say, I think it's kind of unsettling. It's got a very creepy quality to it. So
I think the implication is supposed to be that the dances are rituals.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's why there's no music to go along with it. And the people that end up watching it, especially towards the scene later on where they're wearing the ropes, that was just this ritual that got interrupted, and so it didn't happen the way that it was supposed to. But yeah, I think that makes it more visceral and more weird, and really tunes you into it, because if they were to play music to go along with that, it might take away from the impact that it has.
For sure. Well, let's move on to the second clip then, because I'm pretty sure things are just going to get more intense from here on out.
She kept the company alive through the war. And the Reich just wanted women to shut off their minds and keep their uteruses open. That was blank. Thank you. Well, they're yours.
What? Was that French?
It's a bomb! I can smell it.
Great use of sound design.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because we have talked a lot about the political tensions out in Berlin going on right now. And that's that scene almost ends up being a little bit of continuation of the woman's autonomy, with Sarah kind of coming in and spieling that off, but then letting us know exactly how close those pressures are right outside their walls and how violent everything is around them, and not just as a concept.
Yeah, I think that was a way of showing it without showing it. Mm-hmm. They were able to get the point across and save themselves a significant amount of money by not blowing something up. So, but also keeping it on their reactions as opposed to the explosion. Because something as small as that can really change the entire tone of the scene. And so by keeping it focused on them and their reactions to it, and going over and looking out the window and, oh my God, the bomb just blew up outside, it really does keep the tension in there and in their room and between the two characters.
Yeah, just as a side note, I think it's because I'm so indoctrinated into the X trilogy that I always forget that Mia Goth has an accent.
Yeah.
And not a Southern one. So every time I see this movie, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. She doesn't have a Southern accent. Yeah, that's her voice. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the relationship between, Susie and Sarah is so interesting to me, because they're sort of like, they become buddies in the film, right? And a lot of their interactions together are kind of done in these like dark, secret moments. And, obviously I think that they're starting to, they're kind of together and they're aligned maybe at the beginning, but then obviously they start drifting apart where, Susie, the Dakota Johnson character, becomes way more sort of invested in the machinations of the academy, and the Mia Goth character, Sarah's more she's kind of moving into that kind of final girl territory where she's trying to find out more and more about things that are happening there. But them together and kind of having these little moments are like really great for me in this film. I think that, their relationship is really interesting. But yeah, having that moment of sort of it being interrupted by a bomb kind of reminds you of, again, that kind of political context of where this is and the era of, the sort of, hijackings and bombings and kind of terrorist activity. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's one of the things we haven't even touched on, is just how good the dynamics are between characters in this movie, which I'm sure we'll see a little bit more of as we move on to our next scene. So, I'm in on this movie from like pretty early on, but I think that was the scene where I was like, okay, I like what we're doing here. This is very cool. They are literally using ritual as a dance. And just before we kind of talk about what the scene means, I just have to shout out, I believe the name's Elena Fokina, who plays Olga in that scene. And she is doing those contortionist moves on her own. Obviously, they're exaggerating the way things are popping and looking to make it seem more horrific, but they did a lot of work to make this movie quite practical. But that's obviously one of the first most chilling moments of the scene, and I'm so excited to hear what you guys have to say about it.
I imagine the dancer, even though I'm sure they took precautions, they softened the floor, it had to have numerous bruises for doing this. When I saw that, that was, to me, about I think the parallel to the scene that I had mentioned earlier with the stained glass window breaking. I think that in the original was the first really big shocker sequence. And this, I think, was the big shocker sequence of the reimagining, that this is when, it's on. This is serious. Because you're not expecting it. You're here she's going to audition for a dance, and here's this other girl who is in sync with her, but just getting thrown around like a rag doll, and just limbs breaking and snapping and flying and hitting the wall, and it's a very uncomfortable scene. And I think that is a big make it or break it segment of the film. Whereas if somebody is watching it and they're more of a casual movie fan, I think that this would be the scene where they would most likely drop this is a little too intense for me. I'm done. Whereas some of the more horror aficionados would be like, okay, well, now I'm all in.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there might have been a lot of like original Suspiria fans that weren't fully on board, and then it hits that and it's like, I'll see what this Luca guy's got,
Yeah, body horror is on 11 easily in this scene. It kind of reminds me of, speaking of horror, like there was a film from the late 80s called Pet Sematary. I'm sure you guys remember it, where I was terrified of that film when I was a kid because there was a scene with this character named Zelda. And it was this scene sort of reminded me of that in a little bit, where you're seeing kind of exposed like ribs and bones and body contortions that are very unnatural, I would say. And it's scary. It's scary to see somebody kind of flailing around and not being in control of their body, right? And knowing that it's sort of linked to, this other person in another area that is probably influencing or controlling or having something to do with it is terrifying, I think, just generally. And I was reading that actress that performed that dance actually was doing things, and it wasn't, obviously like with some of the makeup and stuff, but like, being able to bend a body that way, professionally is quite a feat. And I have to say, kudos to her for being able to do something like that. I could never get in any of those positions, not even the natural ones. So it's a very, very, I don't know, to me, it's one of the scarier parts of the film for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I also think it does some good work setting things up in the future as to way that the Coven is kind of in the moment changing their plans when they lose control of Patricia at the beginning, because Dakota is so positive that she can dance the protagonist in this dance. And then she starts, and you can tell that Madame Blanc is like, okay, I believe you, and just touches her hand and like imparts something inside her. And that's why it gets as intense as it gets there, and just fully locks you in on this stuff is all really happening. There is a power and an energy here. How far is it going to go, and what are they doing with it? But let's move on to the next one and see where we go.
We need to get you in the air.
So everything in that clip is so chilling. Just the way they're talking, the very mystical feeling of it, the slow piano, and then immediately cutting into that violence. I feel like this is another scene where people have like different interpretations of what's going on. What do you guys think is kind of happening in that moment, and that a little bit of a back and forth before that clip started of Dakota really wanting to be on the ground and Blanc wanting her to lift herself up more with the jumps?
I think it was she was taking the power from the one dancer, because she obviously was the one who had the most airtime. I think there was a scene before that where she was dancing,
yes,
and you could see her really taking off. And so she was taking that from her and giving it to Dakota, and it's done in a very it's initially subtle, and then it's not, which I thought was kind of interesting, because it's like, oh, you see what's going to happen, and then she falls and has the seizure and everything. So it's like, okay, yeah, that's definitely what happened. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like it's so interesting, this sort of like physical manifestations that happen throughout the film with like, people who are connected to the group and people who start wandering from the group, like, maybe internally even, and sort of what happens to them physically because of that. And so you're always like unsettled about when people are having physical reactions to things like seizures and, obviously with people being possessed and contorting, and you're just wondering like, where is that coming from at all times, and kind of what the motivations are. It's a fascinating scene, and again, I think pretty terrifying, because again, you're going back to this sort of body horror concept of not having no control over your faculties or your body, essentially. So yeah, I always jump when that scene happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that is echoed through the movie, that these different dance rituals, that these different things happening start imparting things on the people around them in very violent ways, which I believe is going to continue to some extreme measures with our next clip.
Bleiben Sie ruhig, Sir! Sie werden die Vorstellung gleich fortsetzen. Entschuldigung, wir müssen gleich unterbrechen. Setz sich das gleich? Na komm. Vorsicht! Wir haben alles im Griff. Wir verstecken. Alles ist gut. Bitte verlassen Sie den Saal. Wir müssen den Abend leider abbrechen. Und bitte schauen Sie, dass Sie nichts liegen lassen.
So that scene kind of shows us the direct outcome of what happens when you go off beat, when you go off the ritual, when you don't follow what you're supposed to do. Because going into that scene, Sarah had kind of gone under the academy and started figuring out some of the secrets and what happened to the missing girls. And that started being reflected on her own body by being in places she wasn't supposed to be. But then this ritualistic dance kind of brought her back in a very weird way. But then it's Dakota going off the beat that shatters her leg again at the end and leads to this just wild sequence that we just watched. I don't know if I'm sure you guys have so many thoughts on this.
First off, I want to say that I can't even imagine how uncomfortable those rope dress things must have been.
Yeah, I'm glad they gave them like some undercoverings to go under it, because it would have been so easy just not to.
Yeah, they would just be chafed and just just be raw by the time, because knowing movies, this was shot in one day. This was shot over multiple days for hours, and I can't even imagine. But in the movie itself, it was interesting because Sarah had just had a compound fracture that they healed, and they're like, here, go dance. And she's out there dancing with the other girls. And like you said, Dakota goes off script, and that causes the ritual to break. And then her leg breaks again, which also breaks the bond between the people and the audience.
Yes.
So that's why everybody kind of is able to snap out of the trance, and it causes the doctor to get up, and it just really wakes everybody up. It's like, oh wait, what's going on? This is more than just a dance number.
Yeah, I did not want this for Sarah, unfortunately. I did not want this to happen to her. You're just like, oh, but she's gonna figure it out, or she's the smartest one right now, and then all of a sudden you're like, nope, it's not happening. She's her bones are gonna break in front of a bunch of people. I mean, the entire sequence of that dance is so. I mean, I think a lot of people remember it. It's very evocative and powerful, and in that moment, I mean, you're sort of, as a viewer, in the trance too, right? Because you're watching this movement and you're watching this, very like complicated dance with these amazing costumes. And then for that just to happen, kind of does snap you out of it and realize, oh yeah, like bad things are actually happening here. And, the idea that, Dr. Klemperer is the one that kind of gets up and sort of like assesses the scene, like primarily is really interesting, because I think at that moment he has kind of an aha moment, and I don't know. I mean, the scene that came before it, where you kind of realize like what's happening with the Sarah character, and like you said, she already had broken a bone, and then you're like, oh no, like is she going back out there, and like, is she okay? And then you realize she's not. I don't know, just really powerful. And again, kind of like a feeling of I just feel uneasy about it in this moment, because you're like, oh, people are dancing, but again, like anything can happen at any time. Like people are going to like lose control of themselves in some way, and it's going to be really scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just where you kind of touched on Dr. Klemperer there, I think we're going to move into our next scene where they're trying to make him their witness.
Mitleid? Warum sollte ich? Du hattest jahrelang Zeit, mit deiner Frau Berlin zu verlassen, bevor es zu den Festnahmen kam. Und wenn Frauen dir die Wahrheit sagen, dann hast du auch kein Mitleid mit ihnen. Du sagst ihnen einfach nur, sie hätten Wahnvorstellungen.
So, Millie, I know you've been kind of very interested with the Klemperer character, and we both kind of discussed him not listening to women. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on in that scene and what kind of preceded it?
Yeah, so this scene happens like right after essentially Klemperer is reunited with his long lost love, right? Who is played by Jessica Harper, who was the original Susie Bannion in the first Suspiria. And, he had thought that she was missing, right? Because they were both under the Nazi regime, and it was during the Holocaust, and, they kind of lost touch with each other, and he had always been trying to find her. So the idea that they, there's a scene where basically she kind of just appears, and her name is Anka, his wife's character. And they kind of reunite, and it's an amazing sequence, and they're kind of walking down the street together in the snow, and it's wonderful. And then all of a sudden this happens after, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Did she exist? Was she sort of, an illusion? And then all of a sudden he's, on the street alone, and he's, being confronted by these two women. So yeah, it kind of snaps you out of it and makes you realize, I think at the end of the day, how powerful this coven actually is, right?
For me, I've seen thousands of horror movies. So I saw this scene coming a mile away. And it was for me, though, it was more of a bummer. Because I'm like, I know what's going to happen. And then it happened. And I went, oh, no. I'm like, hasn't this guy suffered enough? Like he's the one good guy in this, but I know that he's the one good guy in this that is just going to be repeatedly punished for it. And that's what happened. He finally is reunited with his wife, but it's not really his wife. It's all an illusion. And it was all just to get him there for the ritual. And it was good, but it's still, I saw it coming, but it still made me sad.
Yeah, it hurts because we're growing to like Klemperer as like the one person who seems to be trying to do something. But even the introduction of this illusion of his wife kind of lets us know that, the only reason why she's not with him is because he didn't listen to her when she wanted to get out of Germany when they still had time to. That's kind of the big issue, that the reason why he lost his wife ultimately comes down to him not listening to her when she was urging, like, I am not safe here, we need to leave. And we kind of see how that ripples out down the line. So you don't wish bad on him by any means, but they do at least let you know to expect it. They've already been talking about him being their witness, so you're just waiting for the moment that they're going to act. And they did it in the most cruel way that almost seemed like a kindness at first, that maybe hopefully that's what he'd hold on to at the end of the experience. But let us move on to the next clip.
If you accept me, you must put down the woman who bore you. Think of that false mother now. Reject her. Expel her. You have the only mother you need here. Death to any other mother. Say it. Death to every other mother.
Yeah, so most of that scene can't be used, but just the general context there is it's when Susie is being set up to be the new vessel for Marcos, who has, claimed herself to be one of the three mothers. But we're kind of learning in this scene that she might have falsely claimed that title for herself. Blanc probably realized that something unusual was happening, which is why she did not try to claim it for herself. And this is when we kind of see that Susie has been fully unlocked in a way to realize what her true position is within this coven and why it's been like calling to her entire life, all the way back from her little Mennonite farmhouse, which kind of provides so many interesting parallels of this very restrictive upbringing she would have had as a woman to now being in this coven that's entirely run by women and seeing how it was corrupted in a similar way, and her kind of coming in to shift that. This is where things come together in such a genius way. I was so moved by it. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts there.
I think it was really interesting the way that it's presented to the audience, because you know that something's up. I was watching it and I'm thinking, all right, she's not going to be absorbed into the other mother. She's going to more or less somehow transition this to being her taking over. Mm-hmm. So when everyone realizes that something is wrong, she is then fully realized that she draws in death, essentially, who is taking form and then goes around and is killing all of the corrupted witches. And then she goes and grants mercy to all the ones who maybe are on the fence that, they want to die, because they're too addicted to the witchcraft, or they just, they can't be saved, so to speak. So it was a really interesting way to kind of pull everything together and add a little bit of homage to Scanners in there too, with everybody's heads exploding.
Yeah, and also kind of like underscores this sort of her past, right? Her sort of the way her mother is dying, her actual mother back in her Mennonite community, and at some point in the film, her mother had mentioned that her daughter. Susie was like was evil or was a sin, right? She was saying that like her as one of her daughters, she was not the good one.
Yeah, she was
right?
born as sin or something like that. Yeah.
Right. So it's just interesting how that kind of comes back into play in this moment. And, obviously this movie is one big allegory for motherhood in a lot of ways. So you're just thinking, okay, so it's tying in sort of her role as a daughter in her her past life in America. Now she's kind of becoming the mother in another world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just kind of, there's like just the layers that are working there with like her becoming the mother, her becoming the good mother archetype type thing compared to the terrible mother that kind of went back and forth in a lot of the conversations with Guadagnino as well. So that's why. And then just kind of that abuse of power that we're seeing, which is why the people who voted for Marcos, who voted for the false mother, you see their heads exploding as it is finally showing us like their faces against a wall, saying the names out loud, which I just thought was so interesting as it builds into the ending before, obviously, Susie, as the mother now, offers a peaceful death to the three women who were being wrongfully used to prop up a false mother in Patricia, Olga, and Sarah. So it's a really sad scene to watch these women just asking for death, but they're basically just vessel shells right now, and it's the kindest thing that they could do in this scenario. And I think it's part of why that ending is just so moving and mind-blowing at the same time. And that's not even the end, because one of the, I would say probably the biggest thing with the ending of the movie is the scene with Klemperer and Suspiria Arm going to talk to him and explaining, what actually happened to his wife, the reasons why he's done things wrong, but why it's not enough for him to not live peacefully, not remembering some of these more horrible things he's seen. So I really just do think that this movie has kind of been laid out from start to finish with three really major conflicts, and each one is explored to its fullest. I got to know, why do you guys think we're still talking about this movie? Why do people keep coming back to this one specifically? Obviously, we know the original is beloved, but this is definitely one of the more discussed and appreciated remakes as a reimagining than any other movie you can really think of.
I think in general, because there is so much to it. It's not just a straight up remake. It's not just the same thing over and over again. Here is an idea that was from 1977, and it's not updated. It's basically they took the structure of that, because if you look at both films start and end at the same place. Mm-hmm. They both start with her going to the coven, and they end with the complete destruction of the coven. But what happens in between there is completely different. And I think that that's one of the signs of a really good movie and a really good remake, or again, in this case, a reimagining, is that you can really look at it and deconstruct it and see what they did that you liked, and all the different aspects to it, and how many things can be interpreted differently. As we've seen, just talking here, we've had some different interpretations of how things happened. Mm-hmm. And so that's really why people are still talking about that, because there is plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works well in sort of both modes, meaning it's a very rich text. So you could watch it multiple times, and there's something in every scene, right? And it's impossible. Like, if you just watch it once, you're never going to catch every little moment, because everything kind of refers back to the film at all times. So I think there's that. I think that's why people are watching it over and over again throughout the years. I also think it's just a vibe.
I agree.
As the kids say, like, it's a vibe. People love a vibe. But yeah, I think what makes a cult movie is something that maybe wasn't at the beginning super successful, or like a big, box office success, but that gets reimagined or reinterpreted and discovered again by people further down the line. And I think that's why it's going to be around forever. I think people are going to continuously be fascinated by it, and like what it means and the different interpretations. And so, I don't know. I think it's got staying power, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think even the people who maybe walked away wishing that this was more of a direct remake, I think now would at least have to agree that it's better to not do that, to justify your existence. I don't think things need to justify themselves as existing as media, but if you're gonna reshoot something, what's the point of just doing an exact shot-for-shot remake when you can really just kind of play in the world and the emotions and put out those vibes? Like you mentioned, this movie is just one of those things that's immediately what draws you in, is this very unique tone, setting, and vibe that Luke has created in this world. And I think that is why people keep going back to it, that people just want to revisit that and these exciting moments and these exciting visuals and what it means on a larger scale, depending on what kind of lens you're trying to look into. But I think we have rambled on enough about Suspiria. We could probably go for another 5 hours, I'm sure. But thank you all so much for joining me here today. Cecil, would you like to tell the people where they can find you?
You can find me on YouTube at Good Bad Flicks, and that's FLICKS, not FLIX. Also, I'm on social media, same thing, Good Bad Flicks on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot.
Cool. And Millie, how about yourself?
Yeah, my podcast, I Saw What You Did, is available on pretty much every podcasting platform. And the book, TCM Underground, is also available wherever you buy books.
Nice. And my name's Amanda, and you can find me all over the place, but mostly on YouTube and Letterboxd at Amanda the Jedi. So thank you all so much for watching this Suspiria edition of Offset. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Prime Video channel for more content like this. We'll catch you in the next one.